the oppressed. You and I are lobbyists for the afflicted.
What does the Lord require? That you do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God.
And welcome to another edition of the Black Faith, Black Power podcast. This is Bishop Dwayne Royster, Executive Director of Power Interfaith, coming today with a special guest who is no stranger to clergy leadership here in the city of Philadelphia. I'm glad to welcome the Reverend J. Broadnax, Senior Pastor of the Mt Pisgah AME Church in West Philadelphia, to be on the podcast with us today. Pastor Broadnax is from Boston, the city of Boston, did his undergraduate work at Brown, did his Master Divinity degree at Boston University School of Theology. We have that in common because I actually, not BU, I was at Boston College some years later, but he spent a lot of time in Boston, and he's been here in the Philadelphia area for the last 16 years. And has been a great leader in the AME Church, but not just the AME Church here in Philadelphia, and served a great 4-year tenure as the president of Black Clergy of Philadelphia and vicinity, and did great work during that time frame and was a great partner with Power on many things. But Pastor Broadnax and his congregation are also part of the work of Power as well. Pastor Broadnax, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. How about yourself?
Good.
Yeah.
We really appreciate you taking the time to spend with us in talking about Black faith and Black power and what does that mean. So, I want to kind of get into your story a little bit about, how you got into ministry and then your experience here in Philadelphia. But I have to say that, last week, Pastor Broadnax and I were, along with 15 others, were arrested in Harrisburg for protesting and fighting because we want to make sure that our children get the best education possible. And as we were sitting in the Pennsylvania Capitol Police Department jail, we reflected on the fact that 5 years prior, we were arrested together at the Philadelphia airport. So, which was my last day of my tenure as the original executive director of Power. So, Pastor Jay and I only get together to get arrested.
That's right.
We only really spend significant time together when we are getting arrested together. So we're going to get into that a little bit.
Good trouble.
Good trouble. That's what John Lewis would say. Good trouble. So, Pastor Jay, I'm just curious. Tell me about your journey into ministry, your journey in and not just your journey into ministry, but journey into this prophetic ministry. And how did you get here? Because we have a whole lot of colleagues that are doing church but they're not doing prophetic church. And so I'm really curious about your journey in the AME Church. How did you get to this place? What on earth, called you into this moment?
Well, I think I was like most, went through, something of a transformation, post college, and was exposed to a lot of people of faith while I was in college. I mean, I grew up, in a church and grew up, in faith. In fact, I grew up in a UCC church.
Oh, wow.
And, when I'd finished college, I got exposed to some folks that really kind of helped me get grounded spiritually and helped me grow in my faith. And I really saw, and it happened to be at an AME church. I mean, there was no, particular reason other than the people that I was really hanging around at the time or really spending time with and that I was growing with were folks that were a part of an AME church in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I learned as I became, more a part of the AME movement that it was in fact a movement, that it was in fact something that incorporated and integrated, justice as well as, spiritual growth and development. And that became very, very central to me. Growing up, I actually grew up as an extreme minority where I lived. I was, largely in a predominantly white settings and experienced racism firsthand. I experienced, I grew up around the time when in Boston, they were going through the whole busing experience. And, a lot of my friends were particularly involved in, dealing with that. And we saw, the worst of Boston come out. We saw the worst of racism. That folks say, well, you're from Boston, racism. But I mean, it was just characteristic of something that was happening all over the country. Right. Because when I was living in Boston, I was hearing stories about Frank Rizzo and police brutality in Philadelphia. Sure. So, but I came along, and I think that's what really helped me or really grabbed me was the holistic kind of work of ministry. We want people, to know God, but we also want people to live in fair, environments and climates. So all of that, became a part of, and then I became connected with some very sort of progressive people that were doing really, cutting edge work. In Boston, when I was training for ministry, there was a movement known as the 10-Point Coalition.
Sure.
Yeah,
Eugene Rivers and
right.
I forgot the other gentleman's name who was in Cambridge.
Cambridge, Mass. Jeffrey Brown, Ray
right.
Hammond, and Ray Hammond is one of my mentors. He really, he and his wife really mentored my wife and I. In fact, he was at the church that I came up in.
Okay.
And watching them walk the streets of Boston, late at night, with full collars on and everything, and having conversations with guys on the corner, and seeing that really make a difference made me realize, wow, this faith thing is powerful. It can move mountains. I mean, it can move systems, out of the way. So I think part of that. And then also I became really engaged because of, certainly a transformative moment for me was when my nephew was murdered in Los Angeles. He was got caught up in all the violence that was going on in LA. And so that personally, impacted me, as well as a very, very close friend of mine who died of AIDS.
Oh, wow.
So, and I saw
both those accounts.
So
sorry on both of those accounts.
Yeah. And I saw the way those things were handled, and I saw sort of the stigmatizing, and I saw, and that really made me want to be a part of something that not only, fed people spiritually, but also engaged them in terms of making change. And also, and I guess part of my background, having been in multiracial environments my whole life, kind of was part of God preparing me for, ecumenical and interfaith dialogue, and faith-based difference making.
Sure.
So I think that's probably, and all that, is what I brought to Philadelphia with me. And then I, met people that were engaged in it here, and it became sort of a natural fit.
Wow. So you've been in Philly now 16 years, your whole time serving Mt Pisgah AME, which is a great church over in West Philly.
Wonderful church.
And, I would invite you for a minute to draw some comparisons for us from your experience in Boston to your experience in Philadelphia. Compare and contrast Philadelphia and Boston.
Well, Boston is a progressive city in one sense. There are a lot of actually similarities between Philly and Boston, both very sort of neighborhood based, strong ethnic communities in Boston and in Philadelphia, both just very old cities with old structures and old, kind of, Philly is Boston on steroids in some ways, in that regard. But I think in terms of differences, first of all, Boston sits in a progressive state, whereas Philadelphia sits in a very, in it's sort of an island among several islands in Pennsylvania. So, it's a little bit different trying to get things done here, because you really have to rally the troops here in the city, very, very, very actively. Also, I think one of the things that I sort of learned when I arrived here was that because Philly is so such a high percentage of people of color, whereas Boston is not. The integration of faith-based movements happens more organically here than it does in Boston, in my opinion. When I landed here, one of the people at this church, one of the people on staff here was Marguerite Handy.
Oh, sure.
And Reverend Handy was deeply involved in the public square, and she was able to move very, very effectively in the public square, even using her faith environment, and actually kind of help faith-based movements move along very well. In Boston, you get, because of the sort of academic focus, and because of the fact that faith-based organizations are one of many, many options. It doesn't seem to me to happen as organically in Boston as it does here. It seems like you can actually make faith-based movements work here. There's an opportunity because so many people, of so many high percentage of the population, has a faith orientation.
Let's talk about faith in the public square here for a minute, right? So, public theology, public action is a very important part of what we do. And you, for 4 years, you were the president of Black Clergy of Philadelphia. Now, for years in Philadelphia, I heard Power is trying to replace Black Clergy of Philadelphia. And I was very clear with folk. I said, we're not trying to replace them. I said, they're different organizations and they do things differently. We actually need both of them. And in many ways, we need them to kind of work together in some circumstance. And I would love to hear a little bit more about your journey as president of Black Clergy of Philadelphia, your experience with that. But then also, could you help, especially for folk that are listening to us, compare and contrast like the difference from your experience with Power with Black clergy and why both are necessary and that we're really not competitors?
Yeah, I think both are necessary. My experience with being president of Black clergy was really an important one in my life, because it really exposed me to some very, very engaged, socially conscious people, and that really wanted to make a difference. And but anytime you're working with leaders that are sort of among equals, it sometimes is harder. It becomes a challenge for us all to flow together. But I think it really kind of helped me to grow in terms of, how to think in a public way and how to think about how things impact people in our congregations. And that's really kind of what Black clergy, wants to do, is to organize clergy to address social needs. And we learn about that by engaging with our congregations. It is, there's, I think the similarities are becoming more and more now because of the generation that we're in, where power, not the organization, but power in general is garnered by organizing the people to be empowered, organizing people to be empowered. And I think Black clergy is doing more and more of that, trying to empower to the people, empower the people. And power does that very effectively because it's built on an organizing model. So, I mean, Black clergy isn't necessarily built on an organizing model. I think it's built more on, sort of
it's like grass tops, though, isn't it? Really, it's like grass tops leaders getting together.
Yeah, in a sense, right, and trying to bring their congregations along to help us as a community to be empowered, versus one that tries to train membership. And kind of maybe to get into what I'm anticipating your next question will be is around how power has impacted my congregation.
Sure.
I've seen people in my congregation take power or take authority in ways that I hadn't seen it before, and I don't have to run it. I mean, I don't have to drive it. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because they're excited about getting involved in things, and they're telling me what's going on and helping me to kind of be more socially conscious and aware. So, I mean, I think you're right. There's a need for both, because certainly in the Black church, the role of the clergy is very, very highly esteemed and powerful and is needed. People look for that voice. They look for that voice of clergy to speak forth. But at the same time, there's a need to empower people in the pews, to know that they are capable of making a difference, that they have a voice themselves, and that they can lift that voice in a way that is effective.
That's awesome. So I want to shift gears here for a little bit, and thank you for that. I think that was very powerful what you just laid out. So last week, we went to Harrisburg. First of all, tell me about the experience from your perspective. I'm just curious about that and what that meant for us to be in Harrisburg together the way we were.
Well, I think it was important for me. First of all, let's start with Monday, where we did the marches, with the members of Power, to lift up the importance of equally funding school districts. Mm-hmm. And the one that I was a part of was the one that marched from a school in Philly to a school in Lower Merion, and you could clearly see the contrast, which kind of that amplified the need for and then the need to kind of ratchet up the pressure and just really get in politicians' faces and let them know that this is something that we think is important, was really important and impactful. And we started out with working together with several organizations to do a rally, and it was great to have the supportive Senate members there to make a unified statement, say, yeah, we're with this, and we are in agreement with this. So we certainly appreciate that. But I think it was needed to really make people listen, to the need that you can't just bring a drop in the bucket of funding and expect it to make a huge impact, especially when we have a $3 billion budget surplus.
Right. Absolutely.
And I think what we were trying to do was just be disruptive enough so that they got that message that that they might rethink some of their positions.
Yeah, I mean, it was It was an intense rally. I mean, so we were outside with We the People early on, and there were
Right.
several groups that were there. We went in. We were led by the Reverend Nick O'Rourke, who's senior pastor over at Living Water Church, Living Water UCC Church, Knoxwood Circle. And we were marching through, and we were praying. And I kind of chuckled when Reverend Davis was praying at Senator Jake Corman's. She was calling down heaven.
She really was.
She was
She
calling
really
down heaven.
was.
And
It was getting
like,
warm
woo.
over there.
Yeah, I was like, wow, that was.
Mhm.
I mean, before she started praying, you could see
Yeah.
she was really getting centered. And for those that don't know, Senator Jake Corman is the Senate President pro tem of the Pennsylvania Senate. He's a Republican out of State College area who is actually blocking the legislation that we wanted to get passed with regard to full fair funding for students in the city of Philadelphia. Well, it's not just Philly, it's across the state. There are 501 school districts in the state of Pennsylvania. 167 of them are not equitably funded. The majority of those districts are districts that have mostly children of color in them. And there's hundreds of millions of dollars that should be going out every year to those school districts that are not going out, in districts that are very well heeled, majority white districts, are continuing to get more money. And so we were fighting to get the whole formula flipped and to get more money into the school system to kind of provide some equity and parity. So it was actually, what was funny though, is we were praying through the building, and then when we got to the Senate chambers, they would not let us go into the gallery to watch the Senate proceedings. And we were really working hard to try to get in there, and they would not let us in. So we started banging on the doors, and then we decided to sit in. And then eventually they arrested us, 15 of us, including council member Helen Gim that was with us at the time. And we should also say that there was a council member from Pottstown and a school board member from Pottstown that were there with us, but they did not get arrested at the time. So we appreciate, shout out to those leaders that were there with us as well. And then we got arrested and got held and charged with criminal trespass, which is a whole nother thing that we're trying to wrestle with right now. We had white colleagues that were there in Pennsylvania a couple of weeks before. They got disorderly conduct, paid a $50 fine. They went on their way. We get charged with criminal trespass. Can you guess why we got charged with criminal trespass?
We looked a little different.
Just a little. Our skin has been kissed by the sun. And as a result of that, I guess it warrants criminal trespass as opposed to disorderly conduct.
Right.
So, I really appreciate you being out with that. I mean, what was that experience like for you? How was that transformative to you? How did getting arrested, fighting for children, how was that a part of your ministry?
I think it just is an important part of that prophetic voice that we're trying to raise up and not be squelched, not be, we will be heard, and in spite of the efforts. I mean, first of all, they lied to us and told us that they weren't in session, right?
Absolutely.
They lied to us, and then a person who had been in the gallery came out and asked why they wouldn't let us in.
That's right.
Right. So I mean, that just added to. But I think it was. I mean, in one sense, it was frustrating because of. They didn't do the full fair funding, vote for the full fair funding. But in another sense, I really think we made an impact in what was done. I think we also made it clear that we're not going to stop fighting,
right,
that we will continue to fight, and that, some things are just worth fighting for. Our children are worth fighting for. Our having equitable education across the state, regardless of where people are, is a value that is worth fighting for.
Absolutely. I actually earlier today I tweeted out to Jake Corman and Kim Ward, who is the majority leader for the Senate, and the both of them are people of deep faith. And so I asked them the question, how long do our children have to eat the crumbs from under the table? And it's that whole passage coming out of Luke where Jesus and the Syrophoenician woman are having a conversation. And, it just seems to me that they're willing to just give our children crumbs and not actually invite them to the feast when it comes to their education. And so we have to continue to fight to make sure that our children are there. Jesus heard the story of the Syrophoenician woman and said, your faith your child's been healed. But we want to hear the same thing, that our children are going to have educational healing by getting all the resources that they need in the country, in the state.
And I think it's just it is there is an onus on us, or there is on us to make it clear that faith is motivating us, that those of us that are people of faith, we have to take that example from the scriptures seriously.
That's right.
You can't be a person of faith and ignore the cries of the poor.
That's right.
And that we have to continue to trumpet that, because there's this impression, or this reputation that is given, that people of faith are of a certain persuasion politically, but we're lifting up the side of, or the aspect of faith that requires that justice be a priority.
Absolutely. So I appreciate you giving me the time that you have. I just got a couple more questions for you before we go here. One, tell me what your vision is of a whole Philadelphia. What is a whole Philadelphia? And then the second part of that is, what's the role of the Black church in making that happen?
I think that a vision for a whole of Philadelphia is one where everybody, regardless of their economic status, has an opportunity to grow into their maximum potential. That poverty is not because I think poverty is a huge part of why we're having some of the ills that we have in our city. And that poverty ceases to be that factor, so that people are less frustrated, and people are not deprived of reaching their full potential. I mean, I think in some ways I've really fallen in love with Philadelphia because of what it could be and its potential. I just love what makes up this city. It's a city filled with spirit and energy and diversity, and I think that God wants that to be maximized, and that's part of my call to ministry, is to empower people and to preach down the structures that try to squelch people's or diminish people's power. So I think that's part of the role of the Black church, to answer your second question, is to call those things out as we historically have, and to be that conscience, because our people are affected, by it, but also that because there is a moral imperative that is required of us, to make the best Philadelphia that we can possibly make. We want to be the city of brotherly love and sisterly affection. Well, we can't be hypocritical about that.
That's right. That's right. Wow. Pastor Jay Broadnax, really appreciate you being here with us on the Black Faith, Black Power podcast today. What would one final thing, what would your word be to your colleagues right now about getting involved in this work and being prophetic in this moment? What would you say to them?
I'd say there's I think that there's a wave of opportunity for people to use their gifts to make a real difference. And my bishop is for the last 8 years, his whole watchword is called to make a difference. And I think each one of us has gifts to lend to the struggle, and God can use us in mighty, mighty ways. More than just getting people. I mean, we certainly want to get people connected to God and get them engaged with their spiritual, with God's spirit. But we also want to build a whole people, and that's what I really think is a part of what God is calling us to do in this moment, to empower people to be their whole selves.
Awesome. Well, that's a great word to end on right there. Pastor Jay Broadnax, Senior Pastor of the Mt Pisgah AME Church. Thank you for being here on the Black Faith, Black Power podcast. Appreciate all the work that you do, the great way you continue to lead, not only Mt Pisgah, but you lead in the city of Philadelphia. And you really are one of our great elders and leaders in the city of Philadelphia. And I don't mean elders in,
Getting there,
way.
but
but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking
Yeah.
about, one of the great city parents. And then we really appreciate your leadership and everything that you do.
Thank you. And likewise to you. Thank you for all you're doing for power, and that, you're using the gifts that you have and the courageous way in which you lead these kinds of initiatives.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Black Faith, Black Power, produced by Power Interfaith.